Welcome to Pause for the Truth, where you can sit back, relax, and hear an honest dialogue about health, wealth, legal, and social issues. The hosts are Dr. Rogers Kane, family practice physician, and Jocelyn Turner, health education consultant, with co hosts from the Northeast Florida Medical Society and its foundation. Stay tuned for the truth about matters affecting you and your family. We're here to tell you what's really going on and why. Good evening, everyone. I am Jocelyn Turner. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for Pause for the Truth as we continue the discussion on Black youth in crisis. Tonight's show is two of four that we are focusing on in the month of October. And tonight's topic is going to be about juvenile justice. Joining me on the show, as always, is Dr. Rogers Kane. How are you this evening, Dr. Kane?
I am doing great, Miss Turner. How are you doing? I hope all my guests are ready for a lively discussion.
I am doing just fine and am so excited about the opportunity to have this discussion because I don't know about you, Dr. Kane, but I am always so, and I'm going to use the word annoyed when I hear what's happening with our Black youth as far as the criminal justice system or juvenile justice system is concerned. So I am delighted that we have a panel of experts to join us. Tonight, guests include Assistant Chief Lakeisha Burton with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. How are you, Chief? I'm calling you Chief, so if anyone is offended by that, Chief Burton, how are you doing this evening?
She needs to
I'm
unmute.
doing
There you go.
now. Thank you. I'm excited to be a part of the panel in this important discussion.
Thank you, and welcome. Also joining us is Octavius Holliday Jr., Deputy Director of Special Projects with the State Attorney's Office. How are you doing this
I'm doing,
evening?
doing well, Miss Turner. Doing well, Miss Turner. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. And also, Mrs. Natisha June, Field Director for ACLU of Florida. How are you doing, Miss June?
I think we may have lost her for a second.
Oh, we did. So we'll come back. And we're also doubly pleased to have another Burton on the panel. We have the director of I don't know if it's the police force, the school resource officer. Sorry, Director. Sorry, Director Burton. Dr. Director Greg Burton. How are you this evening?
Wonderful. How are you doing? Glad to be a part of the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we have double duty on the Burton family tonight. So thank you both for joining us and sharing your expertise. Did Miss June join us back on the show and began the discussion? Dr. Kane, would you like to start with the questioning this evening?
I most certainly can. There's no easy pitches, but we will get started with what we have on board. So, there are some major disparities in the extent of involvement of minority youth, particularly Black youth, compared with white youth in the juvenile justice system. What are any insight from anyone as to why this exists?
Don't be shy.
Yeah, do I have to call on
Well,
you? Like I have to play teacher and call on someone out the class?
I wanted to yield with Chief
So
Burton.
Well,
I wanted to yield with Chief Burton. Either the Burton.
this is Greg Burton. I
yes,
think
sir.
one of the issues it's cultural. I think right now a lot of our young Black youth are dealing with peer pressure that's involved with a lot of the rap music and the whole industry. We see it a lot in law enforcement, and it's dealing with um, the inability, I think, to cope having good coping skills that is creating violence that we as adults our age um, didn't fall victim to because we had better coping skills. I see that as a part of it, but the good news is it's not all of our black male youth. It's a portion of them, but it's enough to make a difference in the juvenile justice system.
So, anyone else want to add in on that one? Chime in on that?
I will. I got to keep forgetting to unmute.
Unmute.
So I just think that so I think it's a very it's a huge question. I think it has so many different variables and layers to it. And I think that fundamentally, if we go back to the root causes of crime, I think that we go back to communities where our young people are growing up in the violent crime areas, and the root causes are poverty. I think poverty with so many different layers, social issues layered on top of that, single parenting, mental health, economics, schools. And I think that a lot of times in those communities where there's a lot of crime, there's a lot of police enforcement. And therefore, we are encountering more Black boys, girls than other neighborhoods.
Okay. Mr. Octavius.
Mr. Octavius. Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Yeah. You have any insight on that? Any input into that?
I was thinking the same things Mrs. Burton said, and also what Mr. Burton said. It's seems like a tall task, but I deal with the criminal justice system every day, and the young people we get. I used to be a juvenile prosecutor back about 10 years ago, but the young people we seem to get, the young males we seem to get, have some fixation on being hard, on not showing emotions as far as empathy for others, and then you have this whole desire to get money fast or get wealthy fast, and it's a bad mix when you have some failures with the education system, basically, and then also single parent households. So it's just a whole lot coming at us as a community. Because I agree with both of the Burtons.
And I'll just
go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I like to talk, but
you go ahead, Ms. Burton.
Even before young people get really go the route of crime, I think before then they are starving for love, attention, and validation. So therefore, because many times there's an absent father or a single parent, or your grandmothers are raising this generation, or kids are in foster care, so they are yearning for validation. They're getting it from.
And I second that. Oh, I second that. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I second that as well. I was recently at an elementary school last week, and in talking to the principal, I was called to one of the classrooms because the teacher was just frustrated with this 2-year-old, second grade black male. I mean, she was at her wit's end, and she's a black female teacher. And you don't call police to come in and do that. She just got on the radio, and just the first thing send a police officer. And I just happened to be there. And so I go down to the room, and the young man, I asked him to come out. I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "I can't sit in my seat. I get in trouble for getting out of my seat." And I said, "Why can't you get out of your seat?" He said, "Well, my grandma said I have DHD." He didn't know what he was saying. And I think we are so quick to label our young black men that they themselves accept those labels as excuses for what their behavior is and not what held to. But I went back to the principal, and later on, and I was talking to a principal about this, and the principal told me 95% of the children in her school have no fathers in the household. They're being raised by mothers, aunts, and grandmothers. And so
So
with, go ahead.
I'm sorry. So what you're saying is
I'm
parenting
sorry.
plays a huge
What
role
you're
in
saying
this.
is parenting plays a huge role in this.
Parenting or lack of. And when I
Right.
say
Yeah.
lack
Okay.
of, I'm not criticizing that they are bad parents. A lot of times they're just so busy trying to survive. Parenting is almost the last thing on their mind other than barking out, don't do this, don't do that, get yourself over here. But like the other assistant chief Burton said, kids are looking for validation and love. And I think so that lack of parenting is that lack of that validation for that lack of love and that lack of allowing them, as Octavia said, the lack of allowing them to be vulnerable in the presence of their friends and even in the presence of their family.
Well,
And it's
that
so
brings to
interesting that
mind.
I'm sorry, Dr. Kane, just one second. I'm glad that you all are saying that because on our show next week, we're actually going to discuss the emotional or mental health aspect of the Black youth in crisis. So hopefully our panelists will bring up some of the same things that you're talking about tonight. If they don't bring it up, then we sure will bring it up in terms of what you said, and that was a very startling fact to hear that over 90% of the youth in that particular school are from a female headed household only. And it makes you wonder what relationship they have with the male. And I think that's why a lot of organizations have stepped up to the plate and organized mentoring program.
That's right. And
Well, one of the things that I've.
Chief Burton was saying
Okay.
something.
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead, Chief.
I just think that throughout all these conversations that we have about our children, the number one thing that we have to deal with is their emotional health, their mental health, the trauma. If you look at historically where a lot of these young people come from in terms of demographics and geography, a lot of them that are coming from high violent crime areas. I've been saying for years that young people, families are they're impacted by violent crime. It is not normal for people to grow up in neighborhoods where they hear gunshots and they witness people being robbed, stabbed, and killed. But if you go to a lot of communities, it's almost normal, but it's abnormal. And until we start dealing with the mental health of a child, it is difficult to get that child on the right path.
And I think you're absolutely correct, Chief Burton, Assistant Chief Burton. Well, Chief Burton, sorry. So that brings to mind one of the things. Well, one of our participants from last week, Mr. Assistant Principal Jerome Mosley, says it's twofold. They are hyper, and teachers like training on understanding what's going on with the youth. But what it brings in, the next question I have is, according to the Florida Department of Juvenile Justice, Black juveniles in Florida are arrested at a higher rate compared to all other ethnic groups and struggle to get into diversion programs aimed to prevent kids from entering the criminal justice system. Why is that? Anybody?
Well, I can tell you,
Yes.
as far as the schools go, so we've made 18 arrests this school year. And the arrest of Black males have come from the schools that are predominantly Black. The arrest
Hmm.
of white males, which we've made, come from the schools that are predominantly white. Now, I guess the question would be, are we arresting more Black males than we are white males? It's according to what they are doing, and Dr. Green ensures that it is equal justice across the board. If we're going to arrest one person for this, the person that commits that same felony, and they're committing felonies. We're not arresting any young people for misdemeanors. That is being handled through the school. And so I guess that's another topic for who's being disciplined through the schools. But males that we are arresting have they brought guns to school, and that's certainly going to get you arrested. The black males
But
we've arrested have battered teachers or police staff. So those are the end of those are the, they are committing those crimes. I'm not saying at a higher rate, but they are committing those crimes, and those are the crimes that we're going to arrest them for. So
and the
I can't
fact,
say
but
in the school system.
Director Burton, the fact that they're so bold, though, strike school personnel.
It goes.
But
I just
but they're not the only ones. We have white students that do it as well, and they are arrested.
and so I'll
And
just.
so
I think that once they get and go through the criminal justice system, and I think Tavis can speak to this, but lack of resources, perhaps advocates, and parental support, a lot of times you don't see in the African American. So I think so when you and Tavis can speak to this, but I think that's very important when young people go to court and they stand before the judge, that they have somebody there that's advocating for them. Parent support is showing up, and somebody's really advocating.
So I'm going to move
Okay.
on to the next question. Octavius, did you have a comment?
Basically, community-wide crime. I think it's clear that a larger proportion of violent crimes are committed by our young black males. That's kind of a tough pill to swallow, but that's what's happening right now. And that's not saying white males don't commit crimes, but when the severity of the crime is greater, the treatment or the process of redirecting that behavior, or even possibly direct filing into adult court, is a greater chance of that. So we see more of that. But I think part of that question was there's a disparity in diversion, and I don't see that. I think for the most part, if it's your first offense and it's a nonviolent offense, black, white, Chinese, whatever, are going to be diverted for some kind of a non-prosecutorial disposition, that you have to do community service hours or whatever you have to do, but it's not going to show up on your record. It'll be dropped and eventually can be expunged from your record. So that's the majority of arrests. But the violent ones are disproportionately young African-American males.
Okay, so I'm going to go in a different direction and say some researchers have focused on racially disproportionate offending behavior patterns as the primary cause of such a disparity, whereas others have highlighted the persistence of biases among decision makers in the justice system. In your opinion, which is it, behavior or biases?
Some of both. I think I am on the hiring committee for the state attorney's office, and I try to bring in more and more diverse attorneys, because a big part of what happens to a child, not just a child, but anyone who comes up in this criminal justice system, a big part of what happens to them starts on the street with officers arresting them, but people really don't pay attention that the greater impact is how a prosecutor treats that case, and the outcome that the prosecutor is seeking really determines a lot of what eventually does happen to the person. So I do believe more diversity is needed in terms of the decision makers, among judges, among prosecutors, among public defenders even. But ultimately, though, I think it's the behavior, because we can't ignore the violent crime problem. I don't think we can ignore that. So we've done studies at the state attorney's office through the MacArthur Foundation to try to see if there is some racial discrimination, some racial biases, implicit bias in our decision-making process. And ultimately, it was negligible and not one that we thought. I really presumed that it was going to be greater than it was, but it wasn't. The biggest thing is if there's a violent crime committed by a black person or a white person, then those tend to be the cases where there's the biggest disparities, where that black youth will get sentenced to a longer sentence. So obviously it's a problem with the persons making decisions, but then there's also a problem on the side of the youth committing the more violent crimes.
And I want to second that. I think that Octavius hit the nail on the head. I think it's both as well. I think that diversity is essential, even in the police department, law enforcement agency. I think that our agencies should be reflective of our community for these very reasons. And that's why we are continuously in training with officers. So I totally agree.
Thank you. And, I always say, and my favorite slogan, if you've ever had a conversation with me, is if you're not at the table, you won't be on the menu. So as we are talking to our young people who choose to go to college or who, whatever profession they choose, we have to encourage them to seek various types of professions so that we can make sure that the disproportionalities that we see that's happening in systems, if we are at least at the table, then enlighten people, if nothing else. So I read that Black youth are disproportionately confined in jail or prisons longer than white youth. Is that true?
No, I'm not. I don't think I'm not in a place where I could speak, intellectually on that.
I've seen it happen. Yeah, I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen because as soon as it does happen, lawyers in my peer group, we start texting each other left and right about when it does happen. I'll bring the example of the young white male, his juvenile, out of the beaches, and maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, killed his grandmother, planned it, said he was going to do it, and did it, and ended up being offered a plea range between 15 and 30 years. And I've seen young black males in similar situations is that 45 years, 60 years. So even though that's been outlawed now, but still I've seen them get those sentences. So no, I think discrepancies are there. It's not common, honestly, but it does happen. And when it does happen, you can believe that the black lawyers are like, wait a minute, we're going to bring attention to that. So, but I would say it doesn't with the lower level crimes. It's mostly the super heinous crimes where the judges are exercising their discretion and maybe they're not seeing the potential of the black youth, and they're sentencing the harsher sentences. So I've seen it happen. I'll just say it right out. And I'm not calling the judges racist. I'm saying that there is a study about implicit bias, and that's a real thing. That if they don't look like you or come from an area or situation where you're used to, you don't see them the same as someone who maybe deserves a second chance. So that's a real issue. That goes back to diversity on the bench.
And I'm glad you brought that up because I actually was working with a program with the Partnership for Child Health. It's a Robert Wood Johnson funded program on mitigating injustice in the justice system, advancing health equity among youth of color in communities of color. And and one of the main things that the grant is going to focus on is having those conversations, offering those trainings to people. Some folk just are not aware of when the terminology that you just mentioned, implicit bias and cultural competence, and so if more people are aware that it exists. I mean, we are who we are based on the way we were raised, the way things were planted or in us, or that seed was planted, our experiences. And the first part of it is to own that and accept that there is another way, and that culturally we differ, but we have to learn how to coexist and respect each other. Dr. Kane, you want to say?
Yeah, I was just going to ask. So that leads right into why is it that young black males are perceived as a threat?
Well, so I think you look at the technology, the social media, the videos, trade, what we're seeing on the news all the time when people are being arrested.
Okay, so no, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Burton.
No, I agree with that because Unfortunately, it's not that black males are seen as a threat to just white people. We were out one night a few years ago down Jacksonville, Riverside, and we were about 11 o'clock walking back to our car, and we noticed that these two white guys were walking towards us, and they were just two normal white guys, and we just walked and got in our car and just drove away. And we got in our car and we thought about it and we talked about it. Had we seen two black guys coming toward us with their hair, you know how kids wear their hair, we would have gone into alert mode. And that is so unfair to our kids that are just out doing the same thing. And I think it's just we prejudge, and it's according to really what we've been visualizing, what we see in social media, what we see in media every day, and and we had the same fear with our son, and even stifling him from expressing himself because we know how he would be treated, looking the way that he was. And it was just an unfortunate thing. But we had to come to terms with that and say, let him be him. But it's still a fear of ours to this day that he would be mistreated because of how he looks. And he
One of the things that I was going to say was that I got a grandson and he's on autistic spectrum. And when you talk to him, it takes him a couple of seconds. And I'm afraid that he may run into one of the aggressive police officers that may misinterpret his hesitancy as being one of resistance simply because he's a black male. And I'm not a tall guy, but I'm looking at a 13-year-old that's taller than I am, and he's probably about 5'8", 5'9", somewhere in there. And it concerns me. I feel that I'm afraid that he run into the wrong police officer under the wrong situation, that we may have some concerns as to what the outcome may be. And so, and it's simply because, and I fear that simply because he's a young black male, but he's a good kid, but no one else has a way of knowing that like I do. And when they use the stereotyping, as you guys have just kind of implicated as being part of the problem, it concerns those parents and makes you afraid of what may happen to them. So let me ask you this then. So in what instances, and this may be directed at you from the state attorney's office, in what instances might a judge withhold formal adjudication if the youth and family agree to participate in a voluntary service plan?
I really didn't understand that question completely. When you're saying,
Okay.
when will a judge withhold adjudication?
You
I'm not asking
withhold
you to repeat
formal
it, but
adjudication.
the question is kind of convoluted a little bit, and I'll explain why. All right, so
Okay,
when
go
you're
ahead.
talking about withhold of adjudication, you're talking about when a case is filed by the state attorney's office and the person either pled guilty and negotiated a sentence, or they pled guilty to the judge and the judge has discretion. There's rules to that. So if they had received a withhold of adjudication before, then technically they can't receive another one. If that's only for third degree felonies. If it's a second degree felony, they can't receive a withhold of adjudication at all unless the state agrees to it. So there's some discretion there, right? We talked about diversity again. There's some discretion there. If it's a first degree felony, and you can't receive a withhold at all. Now, the only exception to that would be under youthful offender statutes, where if they're under 21 years of age at the time of the sentencing, they could be sentenced as a youthful offender and therefore receive a withhold. And then on top of that, when you get into expungements, it's so much to really unpack on a podcast like this, but there's rules that go along with it. But typically, first-time offender, nonviolent offense, pretty much every judge, if not every judge, are going to withhold adjudication. And the state's not asking to adjudicate. The discrepancies I see, to be blunt about it, is when there's a gun involved. It feels like, I don't have any exact data. It's anecdotal, but it feels like black males are treated differently. So you find Tyrone walking down Edgewood and he has a gun on him, is carrying a concealed firearm. It's a third-degree felony. It's not violent, but he has a gun on him. You treat him like a criminal and you want to make him a felon, where Jeff is over in San Marco, same situation, but he's given a chance to go to diversion, or he's given a chance to get a withhold. That's where a big discrepancy comes from as far as guns. I think that goes back to your previous question. Why are black males looked at as more dangerous? Why is it looked at that black male is not just protecting himself with a firearm, but that he's actually going to perpetrate a crime with a firearm? So, but in terms of withholds, it's a huge. I would say huge. It's just a lot to unpack for an audience like this, but I'll get into it if you want me to.
Nope. I think you kind of answered the question to the degree that we can within the hour of the show that we have. Ms. Turner, I'm going to let you ask the next question, but I do want to just make a statement. Dr. Pauline Rowe says that unfortunately, the black community is also fed in the stereotypes in real life, and also the shows that we produce and support, i.e. on television, are also feed into that racial stereotype. It's not fair, but it's a reality. Ms. Turner? Oh, go ahead, Officer Bird.
Chief Burton wanted to say something.
I just wanted to say something to what we talked about right before that question. You shared that you were afraid of for your family member that has autism, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a real fear, because as a police officer after 22 years, for a long time, I grew up. I have 3 black sons I've raised in this city, and although I know that majority of police officers are good, but I've had that fear too of my black son being pulled over and get pulled over by that one. I just want to let you know that's a real fear. But I think that's why constant training is critical. De-escalation training, cultural competency training, training with special needs. So I think that we have come a long way. I can tell you right now, we have a co-responder program within JSO, where we have a certified licensed mental health counselor that rides the beat with a police officer every day. So I've seen a significant positives in having a licensed mental health counselor riding and responding to calls where people may have mental health or special needs. So, and a lot of calls are resolving in a nonviolent way. So, and I think that we have to have more of that.
So, Chief Burton, do most youth involved in the juvenile justice system have mental health disorders? And I know you're not a mental health expert, but just have you all found that is the case with many of the youth that you come in contact with committing some type of crime?
Well, just my personal opinion, just because I've been years and years working in the trenches of the communities, particularly those who that have been plagued with violent crime. I can tell you, with somebody that deals with my own trauma, even at 46 years old, of something that happened years and years ago, I understand that if trauma is not treated, it's suppressed, and it manifests itself in different ways. And unfortunately, sometimes it manifests in criminality, So again, I think that particularly in our Black communities, where our Black sons are being raised around a whole bunch of violent crime, we had to begin to look at mental health as a serious issue, whether they are a victim of it or a witness of it. Again, I think for years and years, historically, we have the same violent crime areas in the city. And historically, there's a lot of violent crime out there, and we really have to take a deep look at, what we can do to address that, and really begin to talk about the Black on Black crime in the city without getting offended, and really take a look at it so we can really help our young people.
And you said something, you touched on something, Chief Burton, that is a reality that oftentimes, and I'm not saying, it's not true for everybody, but a lot of people, a lot of families have a hard time even recognizing when mental health exists, which is why next week we are going to focus on mental health and have some experts. But I have to give a plug that mental health first aid training is offered by so many organizations. You can contact Baptist Health. They can tell you, and I can't think of anyone else right off the top, but a lot of people have voluntarily taken the mental health first aid course because it is an opportunity for individuals to learn how to recognize when their loved ones are having some type of mental health issue. But I'm going to switch gears a second and ask you all, are gangs prevalent in Northeast Florida? If so, are they as violent as they are in other cities plagued by gangs?
So I'll take that. We do have gangs here in Jacksonville. They're not organized like many of the big gangs like the Crips and the Bloods here over the years. I think that our young people are getting more into, we call them entertainment type groups. They're more they're beefing with each other over um, neighborhoods, and there is no loyalty, but they are certainly have become more violent over the years. But I think that we can always go back to the root causes of a lot of things. It's not excuse, but it's a reality, you know.
Yeah.
No father figures, and a lot of these communities are so many different social issues layered on top of each other. I mean, we have communities that have food deserts, right? So we have to start really looking at that, because again, I worked extensively with gang members years ago, and from a more I guess preventive perspective. What I saw was they needed somebody to validate them. They wanted to feel a part of somebody, something in somebody. So a lot of times they gravitate to that person, that gang member, that drug dealer, and then they just really take on a life of that and become a product of their community.
And I'm glad, last week, thank you, Chief Burton. Last week we had someone from Bridge Builders United, and also I think it's, I hope I don't mess it up, OMG LLC. I think that's the name of it. And I think he's on,
Yes.
Andrew George. And so really I'd like to just challenge and encourage people, as these organizations are made available to families, that you take advantage of them. Octavius, did you want to answer that question about gangs?
Well, I agree with Assistant Chief Burton. It has always been my opinion, and even though some people in my office might disagree with it, it's been more neighborhood grounded. Um, and so we use racketeering charges and stuff like that, but it's normally not super organized. We've had many defendants get caught up in that situation, and they flip on the other one. So it's not nearly as organized as some of the larger gangs out in LA and in Chicago. But as far as violence, it's I can't say it's gang related violence. It's retaliatory. It's a lot of beefs over what I've called silly stuff. Had stuff over the same things that normally happen, over young ladies, over money, over rap songs. Somebody died and they made a diss rap album that it's only seen by a few people on YouTube, but they get so upset about it. And that's kind of what we're dealing with. But I wouldn't say you go around Jacksonville fearing gangs. But I will say this: as far as state attorney's office, we understand groupthink, and even if it's not excuse me, even though it's not a large organized gang, groupthink is serious when you have individuals that feed off of one another's behavior, and then they create greater damage to the community. So it's a serious problem, but not nearly as organized as some larger cities.
And
So go
I
ahead,
would just
Chief Burton.
add
I'm sorry.
I would just add that many of them lack emotional intelligence. They lack hope. They lack empathy. This generation is. I've been doing this 22 years, and I can tell you, it has become more violence, senseless as it is, but it's more senseless and callous, like never before now. So it's almost like it is. They don't care. I don't know how else to say it, but going on these scenes and seeing the results of senseless violence, and the way and the manner of how these killings are taking place, we need to start looking at this and dealing with it.
And also, probably if we did statistics on the people that are in these so-called gangs or entertainment groups that either dropped out of school or not in school, the percentage would probably be very high. And I know people I talk to about gangs, be it on a level of not being in a professional environment or in a professional environment, we always say they're not raised saying, you know what, I want to be a gang member when I grow up. They become disengaged at some point. Um, and then once they get behind in school, they're 2-3 grades behind, and they're 16 years old in middle school. And then it's what's the point? 17-year-old, so I would say that a lot of them feel hopeless, and this is what I am bound to be because of this peer pressure. And then they just get caught up.
And then you begin to see an escalation as a depletion of them going to school or them not thinking that, education is as important because they have their family, and that family, are found in communities, they're found on the streets, but they're offering a set of protection that a lot of young people are not getting in their homes.
Aha.
And
So
that was Miss Natisha June. She just joined us. She is the field director for ACLU of Florida. Welcome, Miss June, and I'm glad you were able to join us.
Thank you for having me.
and so should we focus on the factors that mostly differentiate youth involved in crime from those who are merely at risk of delinquency?
I think the short answer is yes. The
Mm-hmm.
people who are at risk of delinquency, first of all, most children who are arrested, more than half of them, never get arrested again. They made some slip up, they go on with their lives productively. You talk to a lot of adults and they'll tell you about something they had. It's not that. So we're talking about we need to focus resources on the demographics that we know produce the most violent offenders. And there's no rocket science to that. We know the answers already. And if I throw this out here, and I'm going to throw it out there, tell me some people who are going to disagree with this. But if you have a black male and that black male belongs to a single mother, okay, and they have multiple siblings, and that black male has failed 2 grades by the time they get to 8th grade, we already know that demographic alone is going to be problematic as far as graduation and as far as entering the criminal justice system. And we also know if they have a younger sibling, that younger sibling is more at risk to so there are some efforts from our office and from other agencies around Children Hopes Alliance that are focusing on a younger sibling. I think that's great work. Mm-hmm. But if we know what this demographic is, I just feel like we need to be giving more resources to it. And I don't want to be on a soapbox here, but the way I look at Jacksonville, it feels like we still have such a large contingent that thinks, oh, well, I'm safe in my community at the beaches or in Queens Harbor, so that's not my worry over there. But we're one city. We can't keep treating it like it's 2 cities. So we need resources. We need efforts. And so I am on my soapbox because I get mad at my own people who get their big house and their whatever they're going to do and not come back and mentor anybody, not come back and lend a hand to anybody, any organization. I think that's a shame, but that's me preaching right there. But ultimately, we know what the demographic is. We know what to attack. We just need manpower and woman power, and we need resources in terms of finances to get it done.
And I somewhat agree with Mr. Holliday. We've done a lot of research. At one point, Jacksonville was number 1 for death sentences in the country. And when we did a lot of our research, what we found was that the majority of young people, people who sat on death row, that they had their first entrance into the criminal justice system was from a juvenile crime. And from that juvenile crime, they went up to almost 9 offenses from our data that last offense ended up being a murder, and that is how they ended up on death row. And that is not the majority of what we see, but we know that is an entrance factor. And so for me, I don't think that we should differentiate. We need to look at children holistically. no matter if they're more prone to violence or not. Even if they're, even if they may or may not be prone. And one of the reasons I say that is because, we talked about race earlier. When we think about what we're seeing in our schools around bias and around young people, specifically Black boys, and the data has gone up specifically in Jacksonville around young girls, what we're seeing is not only biases, but just straight up racism. And it's good that we have more diversity, but it is the lingering effect of lack of diversity that has caused our criminal justice system to operate in the way that it does, and our juvenile justice system to be broken in the manner that it is. So we need to keep looking at children holistically. You can say that children are at risk factors if they're just African American and if they go to a predominantly white school with a white teacher who is not accustomed to working with young Black children. We could say that a child is at a risk factor if they have mental health disabilities and they go to school for the first time and you have someone who does not know proper de-escalation tactics. Where we just saw a case recently where a young Black male, 17 years old, uses his own de-escalation tactics in order to leave school when he's been triggered. He goes to a calm room. The calm room was not available. He tried to leave the school because he knew he had a trigger. Law enforcement and the school held him in, tased him, and he missed months of school because he was in the hospital dealing with the trauma and the PTSD that went along with it. So we can't just keep looking at one versus the other. We have to look at children as a whole in order to make true change in our system. And we have to look at racism in this state and in this country as a whole. We are fighting machines. We're fighting culture. We're not fighting a symptom.
Got it. So,
Wow.
Mr. Holiday, the one thing I will say is those people that live in the Queens Harbor community or Jacksonville Country Club, they do leave that community. So they do have to face the realities of the world of outside those communities. So,
Yeah, preaching to the choir, brother. I know.
All right. So is the school to prison pipeline a reality? And if so, what does that mean?
You know what?
I'm
I'm
a person for it because
I'm gonna tell you why though. The theory behind school to prison pipeline is that if you arrest children, there's data that shows that if you arrest children early, then that creates greater instances of them being arrested later and them going to prison later on. So there's data that shows that. But then my anecdotal data, which is me personally having handcuffs on me when I was 14, turned me totally in a different direction. So I don't know. That's why I'm saying I'm not the right person, because me being arrested, me getting in trouble and seeing my father disappointed, that was a big impetus for me going and doing what I'm doing now in terms of my life. So I guess it can work both ways, but I think the greater data, and I'll allow not something beyond what my own personal experiences are, the greater data is that if we put handcuffs and take children to jail at early ages, that causes a trauma that does create more instances of them going to prison later on. So,
And
Mr. Burton, you were going to chime.
I just wanted to say I concur with Octavius as well. But I do think are instances where single parents, like I was at one point raising a Black son, where I didn't have resources. I was at my wit's end. He was hanging with the wrong crowd, and I just could not get help. I didn't have a mentor for him. So it wasn't until he entered the criminal justice system to where he was able to get the resources that he needed. So sometimes that happened as well.
And I would chime in and say, yes, there is a school line. It's very real. And one of the reasons is because at the initial entrance of a young person, being arrested, and in certain circumstances where people are totally deviated from committing crime again. But what we have seen is that the pipeline creates, and the pipeline itself is not only about resources, it's also about, what happens next. So you have a young person who is fingerprinting, who has a mugshot, who's arrested. That mugshot and those fingerprints follow that child, right, along the way until either they ask for a expungement of a record, or let's suppose that the person is not guilty, right? If they're not guilty, that record will still follow them unless they ask for early expungement of that record, which does come with a fee, or unless they wait until they're 21, between 21 and 26, and it's expunged automatically. If it is not, let's think even further. That mugshot and those fingerprints don't just stay with the agency in which it initiated with. That mugshot and fingerprints mostly goes to other agencies like FDLE or like the FBI. And you see it in the TV shows and you see it in the movies where they're looking for somebody in a database system, and then they find someone from years ago, and they can find their whole rap sheet or their whole profile in a way. And this is what is happening with our youth. And the more they commit crimes, the more you're able to really track that pipeline even further. Now, how does it continue to act in actuality? When that young person wants to go and get a job, and if someone looks them up for their criminal record, they may find that information. It may be available to them because people can request records. If you keep on going where they want to go to, they want to get into a certain college or in the military, or they want to get certain jobs, it continues to follow them. I think one of the best things that, we were able to do in Jacksonville, and this has been years in the making, was, ban the box for returning citizens, which are formerly incarcerated individuals, or most people know them as ex-felons. But that is not the reality in a lot of parts of our state. In some part, Jacksonville can be looked at as, being more progressive and working towards greater change. But that's not the situation across the state. And it still needs work in Jacksonville.
And what is Ban the Box?
Ban the Box is on mostly on job application. So it's basically not asking the question about whether or not someone is a felon or if they are a former felon or formerly incarcerated. It's something that they don't have to check off any longer. That could automatically let an employer know that they are actually a formerly incarcerated individual, or as we term them, a returning citizen. So it keeps them from having to go through that process. Now, they can disclose it if need be, especially depending on the type of job that they're applying for. But that is one thing that Jacksonville did do, and it's been a long time ago now, but it is something that they did change.
And this is Greg Burton. I can say also in the school system, since the beginning of school this year, we have had over 500 cases where police reports have been written, and we've only made 18 arrests, and not all of those were in schools. Some were at sporting events. And I said that to say this: we are not placing handcuffs on children as often as has been in the past for these minor offenses, because I think of the awareness of dealing with juveniles, and all of our officers and all of the staff in the schools are trained in juvenile mental health first aid. And we realize that these young people are dealing with a multitude of things. And so I think we are addressing this school to prison pipeline issue very seriously, and the fact that we haven't been arresting a lot of young people, giving them that first look at being introduced into the criminal justice system, but giving them opportunities to rectify their behavior in a non-crisis, criminal justice intervention way.
So you brought up an interesting point, and I want to follow up with that question. Are local and state agencies really, or your comment rather, are local and state agencies really working to prevent delinquency and improve the juvenile justice system? If so, explain.
I'll just chime in real quick. I would say absolutely. I think the school board, the state attorney's office, the police department, because we're more aware, we have more training, we have better collaboration. I certainly think we have made strides. Do we have work to do? We definitely have work to do. But one of the things I can tell you is juvenile civil citations. In lieu of taking kids to jail, we started giving out the citations, so that we found that that's very effective. And so we don't have to take kids to jail, but we give them a citation to appear in court. And I think that's one example of, really how much we have advanced.
Yeah, and I would I would chime in and say that it really depends on what state entity you mean. If you're, if you base it on law enforcement, um, I can't speak to that because I'm not a part of law enforcement. But I think that if you think about the Florida legislature and what they are doing, we fought for many years in Jacksonville to get civil citations. So I'm glad that you all are using them. And even in that, the barrier of having to fight to get a simple word change from may to shall, right? And ensuring that law enforcement was using that shall part to actually ensure that civil citations would be sent across the board for young people. But I think when we look at our state legislature, we're starting to see some inklings of some changes in juvenile justice. You've had some heroes in Jacksonville, like a Representative Tracy Davis and others who have been, putting forth good bills towards juvenile justice that focus on, expungement of records. We have a bill that may be coming out that has already been filed pretty soon, not by the ACLU, but by a sponsor that will help to cut out fines and fees for young people. It is HB 257. It's something that I read up on today that may be a positive bill going in the positive direction in how we look at incarceration, but also how we look at fines and fees as well as court fees for young people, because we know that young people don't have jobs. So it further, you know, punishes parents as well as young people, because parents will be the ones who have to pay for fines and fees.
Thank you. And we could continue the discussion. And I would like to ask you, since we were having some technical difficulties, if our panelists wouldn't mind hanging on a little bit longer. And as we have had some comments placed in our chat room, and we actually have someone who'd like to call in. Do you mind, panelists? I know we say we would end at 7:30, but we're having such a good discussion. We'd like to hang on just a few more minutes if that works within your timeline. Is that okay, everybody? Just a
That's
few
Sure.
more minutes. I think our technology guy just sent me a message that someone from our audience had a question. Is that person on now that they would like to ask our panelists a question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sir. All right. Good evening, everyone. This has been a great conversation. To Miss Chief Burton, Mr. Burton, and Mr. Holliday. I really appreciate your feedback on this, and this is something that I know, even from an educational standpoint, that we've all been working with. And I appreciate all your feedback, and I do believe that we are all working together for the same cause. And um, my biggest thing is that we're all having the same conversations and know that we all want to provide the same support. My one big question is, as we go through this journey to try to help change these lives of these youth, especially the African American males, there are some disparities, and we know that. But I think working with the state attorney's office, with the sheriff's office, and the educational system, we can come together, but we got to be proactive. We know what's going on in the community that drives the force for these young men, especially the young men with these underlining trauma issues that we have to address. We have to dive into that big, because that's what's causing a lot to me from my experience from the educational standpoint. That trauma that they're going through, of course, I think a couple of you did say that it's not being addressed, and so we definitely have to tackle that. Which, if you go back, well, I don't know if you've done the research or heard it, I'm sure you have, but a lot of the youth, they're having these anger problems, these mental health problems, with no type of I guess medical diagnosis, or are medicated or whatever, or don't even know they have a problem, but they're in these neighborhoods, in our struggling neighborhoods, and they're learning from people that they are growing up in the streets with, so they're picking up a lot of the negative behaviors, which in turn just causes more problems and all of that. But we have to address those mental issues, and so I think if we be more proactive and dive into that, and provide these services all across the board through education, even in our juvenile system, to provide these rehabilitative services that we do have. I just think, like Mr. Holliday said, we need more funding and more grounds on more boots on the ground to tackle this problem, and we could probably put a dent into what's going on.
So,
I,
you had
I,
that was just a comment. You didn't really have a question of our panelists from that.
Yeah, but somebody did have a response to it. Someone had a response to it, though.
I was just going to say thank you for joining. And I think that we have a plethora of resources available. There's so many different nonprofits, you serving nonprofits doing amazing work, and churches all over the city. I think that we have to look at a more holistic approach. I think somebody talked about that earlier. It's not enough just to help the Black boy. We have to infiltrate the family. The Black families are broken and for many different reasons, but we have to begin to look at a holistic approach. And another thing I would just say, this whole idea, this stigma around mental health in the Black community, we have to somehow break those barriers, build trust with parents so they can understand the importance of getting that help and looking at those red flags and identifying these things early on with their children and really seeking help.
Thank you. So I would like to move on to the next question. According to the state's Juvenile Justice Department, non-judicial arrest means an alternative to judicial handling in which the juvenile will not have a criminal record upon successful completion of a diversion program. Please explain what that means, because if a youth is arrested at an early age, that could follow them. And I know we've already talked about that, but did anybody else have anything else to add to that?
Well, I'll just explain what diversion is. Diversion, the whole that's the word means that you're diverting the child away from actual criminal prosecution. That's going to be even a chance for adjudication in front of a judge. Being adjudicated delinquent actually on the juvenile level. So we have teen court, we have pretrial intervention, we have all these things, programs through which is now ran by the Children Hope Alliance in terms of redirecting the behavior. And I already told you that more than half the children that get into a criminal situation don't reoffend again. So the direct redirection is pretty easy to do for a lot of the children. And even for the ones who it might have been a little bit more serious crime, I think we have taken leaps as the state attorney's office a little bit more progressive in terms of diverting some crimes that were typically prosecuted. I know that burglary to a vehicle was one that we wouldn't divert 10 years ago, but now is one which is commonly diverted to avoid that situation of having that record follow that child for a long time. So there are opportunities, definitely, but that's what a diversion is. Is you never get officially booked, and even if you do get officially booked, you go to a program where if you complete it, we agree to drop the charges, and that's important because, like I think Letitia said, I forget who said it actually, but if the child gets a not guilty at trial, perhaps, or pleads and get a withhold, that can only be sealed. But the state attorney's office actually drops the charges, then that charge can be expunged. That whole situation can be expunged, which is a lot cleaner erasure of any of that criminal history.
Yeah, and to piggyback on Octavius, I think one of the interesting things about diversion programs is it depends on who is running the program. You know, if it's a nonprofit entity, we've seen success because people are able to stay with them a little bit longer. There have been some changes with the state attorney's offices, but I think one of the things that we've seen in diversion programs is when they are community based. And one of the programs that I've worked with for years has been with iCare, helping to create student accountability boards, also helping to create neighborhood accountability boards where they're actually able to go before individuals in their communities and, you know, talk it out. Like, this is what happened. This is why I stole this object from, you know, Walmart or whatever store. If it is a theft or something like that, they're able to pretty much kind of be sanctioned in a way where if they complete that program, we see a significant increase in not only their success rate from that program, but also their success rate going into adulthood. I think some other things, though, with diversion programs is that, you know, for a long time, we were seeing diversion programs that further incriminated. We were seeing some programs that were available for some young people and not for all young people. I think that true diversion really starts when we start to decriminalize offenses that are not as egregious as we have made them out to be. You know, right now we're looking at an issue in a total different state. I know this is not Florida, where young people are now being charged with just looking at a fight. It could be something that's simple, but
Yeah.
they didn't get into the fight. They're now being arrested. We just had 4 black girls, young black girls, to be arrested who are in elementary school, right? So we need to start thinking a little bit more about the policy and procedure within the internal system. What can we decriminalize? What does need to be criminalized? Because of course we do have a lot of violence that is happening, but some of these cases, if we're being very honest, are not all violent. And there's more training now, but we need to make sure that we have more than just, when we talk about boots on the ground, we need to be talking through law enforcement. As you know, the ACLU stance is that we should not have, law enforcement in school in general, because what we see is an escalation instead of a de-escalation. But when we think about boots on the ground, we need to think about more social workers that can be in our schools, more guidance counselors who have, who are actual therapists that can be in these schools. And I did hear Chief Burton talk about that a little bit earlier. We need to have more nurses that can be in these schools that can actually see some of these signs in our young people and say, this is what is actually happening, versus, we're just going to go ahead and bring further harm to our child and take them out of school. And then that further keeps them away from wanting to get their education. So I think that, like, as Octavia said earlier, you have some good diversion programs, but you need programs that can actually help a young person to rehabilitate and to be corrected, and not to further criminalize. And there's always much work to be done around that.
Boy, Miss June, you said something that I'd like Director Burton to follow up on. No school resource officers? What say ye, Director Burton?
Why she trying to take that man's job, though, is what I'm trying to figure out.
I'm trying to come off
He just
of
got it. He just got the job.
I'm trying to come off of mute. Well, the only reason the state legislature now is they are and thank you for bringing out that there are some legislation that's coming in to decriminalize certain things, but the state legislature now is more focused on prevention of active shooters. And that's why at every school there's a person with a gun, be it a school resource officer, a deputy sheriff, or a guardian, because the main focus now is on active shooters. So being that the school staff now, they are no longer calling us for a lot of the things that the students are doing, like fighting, unless it's a fight that cannot be broken up. And even at that, the school staff are trained to de-escalate before the police officers get involved. And we try to let the police officers get involved as a last resort. So I know we need officers in schools. We've gotten 3 guns out of schools this year. We've made 18 arrests, people committing the felonies. So at this time, in the society that we live in, I know some districts and a couple out west have decided not to have police officers in schools. And I am very interested in seeing over the next year how those jurisdictions are going to fare and handle certain things that a police officer would normally handle.
Yeah, that definitely would be interesting. One last question, and then we'll wrap up the show. But I would like to ask, what advice would you, and I'd like for all of you to answer this question, what advice would you give a parent whose child has never been involved in the juvenile justice system, but they've noticed a change in their behavior or the friends they hang with? Chief Burton, I'm going to start with you, followed by Miss June.
And by the way, we have 2 Chief Burtons, so you got to specify who you're talking to.
Lakeisha Burton.
My advice would be to have a conversation, really dig into what's going on. And if the parent's not comfortable, find somebody that can get the attention of that child to begin to talk with them. Because a lot of times our kids, they communicate in a very different way now, and a lot of times our kids don't really open up and communicate with us. But there is somebody that they will. So I just think that just asking that child and finding a safe place, a safe person that they will confide in, and then really get the resources that they need. But most importantly, I would encourage families not to give up on their children.
Thank you. Ms. June, what about you?
Yes, I definitely agree with the Mrs. Chief Burton. But what I was going to say is one of the things that I think is really important as a mother of 3 Black boys as well is to have your team in advance. And it's something to what Chief Burton alluded to, but to ensure that you have people that you can go to confide in, to also talk about some of the behaviors that you are seeing that are changing. Because I think that as a mother, I see certain things and I'm able to go to my husband and say, hey, I've noticed this difference in, so and so. What do you think it is? And they may say, oh, that's just, him being a young man, finding himself, things of that nature. So it may not be as much cause for concern. I think that if you are seeing negative behavior, if you're seeing, inklings of some trauma from mental health issues, if you're seeing your grades change, or if you are seeing friends change that are not the people that you want your child to surround yourself with, you want them to surround themselves with, I think that's when it's important to ask the questions, why this change in relationship, what is going on with you, and being able to come open-minded. I think that oftentimes when we see something that looks like a red flag, we come very accusatory. And we really need to come with an open mind to ask very honest questions, because one of the things that we don't want to do is we don't want to cut off dialogue with our children, right? We want them to know that they can come and confide in us. So, have your team together in advance, people that you can go in, confide in, that you can ask, questions if you see some change in behavior. And then definitely come open-minded to the conversation. Don't always assume or accuse your child of something.
Thank you. Octavius, what about you? What would you tell the parent who's noticing the behavior in their child and the friends they hang out with?
Well, at the risk of stereotyping, but all right. First of all, I'm a member of the 100 Black Men. So the typical situation we see is a single mom with multiple kids, and the oldest child starts to act differently, starts to hang in the street more, that kind of thing. And we say the same thing, that they'll be what they see. That's the 100 Black Men motto. So you have to get the young man, typically around positive men, typically positive Black men. Whether that's going to be through sports and you have coaches that's going to assist that young man's development, or I know so many mentoring groups off the top of my head, bridge builders. You have Lamplighters with Omega, you have Kappa League with the Kappas, and Embody with Deltas, and you have all these groups that their main focus is to be that stopgap when there is no male role model in the house, no father figure in the house that's putting hands on the child and not beating the child. Hands on the child meaning loving the child, nurturing them, and getting them to go in the right direction, teaching them how to be a productive young man. That's what's missing in a lot of these cases. And that's where we go right back. We're going full circle because we went back to our conversation about gangs and groups causing, leaning on each other for their own family, for that family in the streets, where there are so many positive outlets. I would say even the church, that there are so many positive male mentoring groups around the city, but you have to be proactive. So we talk to the mothers and say, you got to be proactive. You have to get them to us so that we can actually love on them and get them to go in the right direction. And it just works wonders. There's so many success stories when you have consistent, long-term male mentoring. My own personal mentee rather, he's in college now. I need to pick up another one. So that's how we do it. We stay with them, and hopefully, and we've seen this happen with 100 Black Men, they graduate college and come right back to us as mentors themselves. So that's what I would suggest to them, that one, don't give up hope. I agree with Assistant Chief Burton, but also there are so many people in the community putting in hard work to really make a difference in these young men's lives, and you just have to reach out and find it. So
Thank you. And Director Burton, what about you?
I agree with all the comments, and Attorney Holiday, he didn't mention what the Alpha's doing, but that's all right. We'll talk about that later.
Distinguished gentleman of
Let's leave that alone. Let's not go there.
We know each other very well, and I see him all the time mentoring to young people, and he's one well to speak on. I believe in everything that everybody else has said. I come from a more practical perspective. If I was to give someone some advice, I would say, look, if you're noticing a change, find a young male if you can't, a man, if you can't do it yourself, and talk to that child about puberty and what's going on with his body, with his mind as he's growing. We've had to do that with our children. Talk to that young man about what effect these video games and extended screen time is having on your mind, it's having on your ability to communicate and or not with adults or with other people that you do not know. And then I would say recommend that children, or I would advise a parent to find some type of spiritual outlet for that child, be it at a church, a mosque, a temple. But I think we may not be feeding the spiritual part of our children as well as we should be, knowing that, that spiritual part makes a big difference. We were all probably raised in the church at some point or another. And we know how the impact was for us being raised in the church, or at some time had some encounter with someone that was in the church and fed into us spiritually. So that's the advice I would give.
And Director Burton, you said something that had not come up tonight, and I'm not going to ask you to go on it to talk about it any longer because we are nearing the 8:00 hour. But I would like to interject this one terminology that we hadn't talked about tonight, as each of you are allowed to give your final thoughts. We've not talked about the influence of social media in the behavior of our young people. So I'm going to go backwards and start with Director Burton to give your final thoughts on tonight's topic. And if you'd like to also interject something about social media, the influence that it has.
Sorry. Yes, the social media is having probably the greatest impact on our children of anything else. Their emotions are guided by social media. Their intentions on what they want to do or become in society is guided by social media. They could be right in the room next to you and text you instead of talk with you. And I know in our household, we say, boy, you better come in here and talk with me, holding them accountable for expressing themselves. So I believe that the biggest challenge that we do have in this current age group of young people is dealing effectively with social media. I know it's so hard to limit their screen time. I mean, it's almost impossible, but we have to do it in certain ways that it doesn't turn against them. And they don't think that now we are becoming their enemies, because they then will act out in another way. So it's having a great influence on our children, and we deal with it the best we can in our household. But unfortunately, we are doing some screen time ourselves, although we may not be playing games, but our emails, and we're checking Facebook and so on and so forth. So It's almost sort of like the pot calling the kettle black.
So we need to check ourselves before we check our children. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and, since the Burton household is speaking, and ask the other part of the Burton household, what are your final thoughts on tonight's topic as we close the show?
Obviously, I agree with my husband, everything that he said, but most importantly, I think that these conversations are very important, real, truthful dialogue where we all can come together in this space and respect each other's views and insight and really have a genuine love and passion for the work. I think that we have to continue to do this and make sure that we get away from all the division and we begin to come together and work together. These issues have been going on a long time. We have had progress. There's still work to be done. And obviously, I just believe that we are stronger together. So I learned a lot from this conversation tonight. And I think that's what's important, that we continue to feed off each other and we learn and we grow so we can better serve each other and our community. So thank you for allowing me to be on this call tonight.
Thank you. Miss June, how about you? What are your final thoughts on tonight's topic?
I want to piggyback a little bit off of what Chief Burton just said and kind of tie it into something that Mr. Holliday said earlier. And I think Bridge Builders United was coming to this in their conversation. But one of the things that we have to do is that we have to learn how to advocate not only for our children, but for our community. It's really important that this conversation does not stay here. We have to be very much solution oriented. And so if we're talking about ways that we can make actual change, that means that at least everyone who is on this call tonight, even us included as panelists, need to go and spread the word to 3 more people about what we learned this evening and about the changes that we need to be making in our community. That is the only way that we're going to affect change. That is the only way that we're going to see change. And then as a mother, I have my children are a little bit younger probably than some of you. And so one of the things that we've been doing is we've been monitoring social media very early. My children don't have social media accounts. I'm almost non-existent on social media for a number of different reasons. But, mirroring, I think Director Burton said it earlier, our children are what they see. And for me, it has really been about what is most important to me. Is it spending time with my child now while they're young? And why they're as malleable as they are, or is it going to be the screen time? And so as adults, we have to put our phones down. We have to get off social media and begin to have conversations and dialogue with our children, eating dinner together again, preparing meals together again, going for walks, going to the park, right? It all starts with us. And when we have parents who are single parents, who are working really hard, who are not able to always be there with their children, I think it's important to talk to our young people about the rights they have. And then also, even with those rights, there are still consequences. So what do those consequences realistically look like when we, are on social media all the time, not only for our mental health, but consequences in other arenas? A lot of the issues that we're seeing around violence in our schools, we have been able to see those within the community on news, not because there was a news camera there, but because of social media, because someone videotaped it and the news was able to get the story that way. And so we really need to also talk about consequences of social media within our communities as well.
That sounds like a future show, wouldn't you say, Dr. Kane? Thank you, Miss June. And last but not least, our Assistant State Attorney Octavius Holliday.
Well, I'm going to make my comment brief. It goes back to, and I'm not going to talk about social media. Everyone's kind of talked about that, but I know personally the people who were on your panel last week, and I know everyone on your panel this week. And what I'm getting at is that's not a brag for me, but that's saying that the same people are really doing the work in the community. And I'm just going to repeat what the last speaker said, Ms. June said. We need to go out and make sure others who are able, and I do this a lot because I've raised my 4 already. They're already adults. My double twins are already adults. So not only have I raised them to be actors in the community, be active in the community and making a change, but we know so many people who just go home on Friday and then go back to work on Monday, but they've enjoyed themselves all weekend, but they're not really looking at the issue as and owning it and putting the sweat and the work that goes into making a difference. So I just encourage us all to do it. I know I will. I got a new role with my Omega chapter, and I'm going to be cracking the whip pretty hard. I hate that analogy, but yes, I'm going to be actually asking for more and more effort to make a change in our young Black men. So I just identify with it so much based on my own upbringing and the neighborhood I'm from down in Orlando that I can't do anything else. So with that being said, I feel like there's a great opportunity to share with one another. Thank you for the invitation. And I just believe that we need to just press people who we love and care about to make a difference. If they're able to, if they raise their children already, then raise some more. Be an impact in somebody's life. So that's all I have to say. Ms. Turner, you know I love you. Go Gators, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. And Dr. Kane, I'm going to let you say a few words before we close out the show.
All right, go Rattlers. What I would have to say is I enjoyed every one of these speakers this evening. I wish we had corrected our technical difficulties a little sooner, but we did get it under wraps. It extended the program, but it was a well-deserved. I would like to thank everyone for participating in this discussion. I do think as our group, the Northeast Florida Medical Society, which are Black physicians, we have to take a lead role in addressing these issues. I am looking forward to having to help arrange a town hall meeting on this subject matter. I would like to also thank the OMG and LLC and Bridge Builders for the participation that they've done in the past and the roles that and the things that they're doing currently for our community. I will contact each one of you guys just to find out as medical professionals what we can do to help. We do understand mental health issues. We are looking to address that next week, as well as the role that drug use plays in mental health, and that should be a doozy in itself. And I hope that each and every one of you at least join us for our discussion next week as we go to part 3 of our series, our 4-part series on Black youth in crisis. With that, I'd like to thank everyone for participating and hope to hear from anyone and everyone soon. Just let me know what I can do as I try to help organize the addressing Black youth in crisis, especially with me having 5 girls, 1 boy. They all old because I'm old. But I still have grandkids that I have to be concerned about.
So thank you to all of our panelists, Assistant Chief Lakeisha Burton, Assistant State Attorney Octavius Holliday, Miss June, ACLU Field Director, and Director Greg Burton with Duval County Public Schools for giving us a very, very, very lively discussion about a topic that is obviously so near and dear to all of your hearts. Thank you for your passion. Thank you all for being participatory, as Dr. Kane said, in the discussion tonight by posting your chats. Thank you for sharing on your social media platforms. Don't forget to share that we are going to continue the discussion next week on the topic of Black youth in crisis. Good evening.
Thank you for tuning in today to Pause for the Truth. We hope that you gain more knowledge about today's topic and that you will tune in next time to hear about what's trending and what you can do to help make life a little less complicated for you and your family. Growing our presence allows us to reach more people, so we need your support. Visit our website at www.pauseforthetruth.com. Like us on Facebook, tweet us on Twitter, link us with LinkedIn, but most of all, download the Podbean app to your mobile device and become a follower of Pause for the Truth. We have dedicated our careers to sharing knowledge. Now we ask you to pay it forward and invite others to Pause for the Truth. You can email question or show topic recommendation to us at info@pauseforthetruth.com. We would also like to give a hearty thank you to our behind-the-scenes technology engineer, Mr. Tyrone Jackson. You can contact him for your technology needs at www.calltyrone.net. Until next time, stay well, stay safe, and always remember, take time out to pause for the truth. This is when Dr. Rogers Kane and Ms. Jocelyn Turner signing off until next week. Good night.